So welcome back. We're in the second episode of speaking about the Vietnam War and its role or its place in our larger discussion of the collective shadow of the United States and what we might do as Americans to heal our various narratives here in the third decade of the 21st century. So we mentioned that Ho Chi Minh had written to President Truman and the leaders of China and the Soviet Union and other United Nations countries at the end of World War II asking for help, and none of the leaders chose to respond to him. Here in the US, it's unclear whether the CIA actually kept those letters from President Truman or whether President Truman did see them and chose not to respond. Either way, those letters became public knowledge with the publication of what are now known as the Pentagon Papers in 1971, but that's getting a little bit ahead of where we need to be. When he received no response from the world leaders, because 2 million Vietnamese had died of starvation during World War II, Ho Chi Minh spoke to the Vietnamese people, and specifically, but not only in the North, and said, quote, "We apparently stand quite alone. We shall have to depend on ourselves." Right. So subsequently, and this was 1945 forward, subsequently, the French began to attempt to recolonize Vietnam in what would end up being about an 8-year war. And first under President Truman and then under President Eisenhower, we funded about 80% of that war for France's attempt to reestablish its colonial ties in Vietnam, because having a Western ally in Southeast Asia felt safer than risking what was becoming known as the domino theory, where if one of the smaller nations in Southeast Asia became communist, then all of them would, in domino fashion, fall under communist rule. So, that's the background from which we got involved in Vietnam. In 1954, the French suffered a crushing defeat and withdrew their efforts. I mean, this is a military defeat, withdrew their efforts to try to reestablish their colonial presence in Vietnam. And from that point forward, American involvement began to be stepped up. First, in terms of being advisors and kind of covert presence on the ground in Vietnam, and eventually, as we all know and as we'll see, in more overt military engagement. So we'll pick up with that more overt involvement in our next episode. Thank you again for tuning in, and I'll see you the next time.